Welcome into episode 91 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tacek.
Following up on the follow-ups, or mix and match number 3, pairs beautifully with Mambo number 5. As we do with these mix and match shows, today we're looking at 5 stories, each big enough to tell you about, though none big enough for a show of its own. Now, some are follow-ups to topics we brought you before, while others are brand new to the checklist. We'll be covering topics like the Twitter password screw-up, the apparent fall of Cambridge Analytica, a brand new Facebook leak, more details on last year's Equifax breach, and finally Signal and the case of the reappearing, disappearing messages. Now, I say we'll be covering topics like those. They'll be so much like those that those are in fact the topics we'll be covering today. Let's start with Twitter's whiff on password protection.
Twitter recently reported an incident where user passwords were exposed and took the extraordinary step of telling all of its users to change their passwords immediately. Normally, we see these types of mass password resets in a situation where bad guys have made off with a password database, or some other serious breach has occurred. In this case, however, there were no bad guys. Twitter dropped the ball when it came to password security and promptly owned up to said mistake and immediately mitigated any potential threat by having all of its users reset their passwords. So what exactly happened? How did Twitter manage to breach themselves? On May 3rd, Twitter announced that they had identified a bug on their systems that inadvertently stored passwords in plaintext in an internal log file. Normally, user passwords are hashed before being stored on Twitter systems, which is a security precaution that makes it much harder for the bad guys to gain access to individual accounts, even if they make off with Twitter's hashed password database. Now, we talked about how passwords are hashed way back in episode 41 of the checklist, our episode on authentication and online security. Well, there was no indication that anyone outside of Twitter had access to said log file. Out of an abundance of caution, Twitter urged all of its users to immediately change their passwords.
Now, I was going to ask about that because you said earlier that Twitter had all of its users change their passwords. They didn't actually require anybody to change their password. It wasn't like you tried to go onto Twitter and they said, hey, you need to change your password. The way like Apple ID will every 6 months or however long it is that they make you change it again. Twitter didn't require it, but it was big news. I want to say even the local news was running the hey, change your Twitter password thing.
Yeah, they sent an email, and I think they showed an alert when you logged in. I changed my password before, like I saw the news, changed my password, and they actually sent all the alert email stuff after that. So yeah. It was, I should say it was a password request, or they requested that the users change their passwords. But no, I don't think they actually forced users to. So this whole situation is a bit strange no matter how you look at it. First, it's usually the bad guys who find the poorly secured log files full of plaintext passwords, not the company themselves generating those logs. Second, it usually takes a company a while to shut down a bug like that, and even longer for them to recommend that users change their passwords. Finally, it's really rare that a company owns up to a security breach completely unprompted. Normally, it's like pulling teeth to get a company to own up to a data breach, and they only do so once it hits the news and the evidence is out there in the wild and staring them in the face. So, all in all, we have to give Twitter kudos on the way they handled this embarrassing situation. I mean, sure, they had to deal with a few days of bad press over the incident, but they came through on the other side relatively unscathed and earned a lot of goodwill from security pundits who aren't used to seeing this type of honest and noteworthy behavior.
Do you think we're going to see more proactive moves like this one? I mean, in the wake of Equifax and the back and forth distrust of Facebook and Panera, giving out your personal information with every sandwich, and Home Depot, and I mean the list just goes on and on. You think companies are going to start being more honest more quickly, or was Twitter willing to do it because it looked like nothing bad actually happened?
I think, well, we talked about this kind of a little bit on the GDPR episode last week, that there are some new requirements in the EU, at least, for data breach notifications. So that might have been playing a bit of a role there. But we've also noticed that when these companies try and sweep things under the rug and then later it's still made public either through a whistleblower or whatever the situation may be, that it's a lot worse for the company then. The crackdown by government or whoever on the company and the bad press is way worse if they try and hide it than if they just own up early and easily. So I think it's going to depend. I'd like to say, yes, we'll see more of this. But in reality, companies do like to stick their heads in the sand.
In a lot of ways, this is almost like a greatest hits episode. I mean, not all of them. Again, there are some things we've not talked about before, like that Twitter issue. But then there are others that we've talked about, oh, golly, more than once, like our, quote, friends, end quote, at Cambridge Analytica. Like a bad penny, although they might actually finally be going away, maybe. What's the latest on Cambridge Analytica?
Well, as a quick refresher on the company, Cambridge Analytica was at the center of the Facebook scandal where data from, they say, up to 87 million users was used to micro-target potential voters with ads during the 2016 election season in the United States. We talked a lot about the company in our Facebook Follies episode, checklist number 85. Well, Cambridge Analytica is back in the news for a few different reasons, and none of them are good. Back on May 2nd, Cambridge Analytica announced that it was immediately ceasing all operations and would be commencing insolvency hearings in the UK. At the same time, parallel bankruptcy hearings would be commencing in New York for its US-based affiliates. As if that wasn't bad enough, news broke late in the evening on May 15th that Cambridge Analytica was under investigation by the FBI and Justice Department. The investigation appears to be focused on the firm's financial dealings, as well as how it acquired and used personal data from Facebook and other sources. Now, Cambridge Analytica is under investigation on the other side of the pond as well, where the National Crime Agency in Britain is investigating allegations of bribery, destruction of evidence, computer hacking, and violation of Britain's Data Protection Act.
I think I was being optimistic to say they might finally be going away. I will bet you that we'll do at least one more mix and match show where Cambridge Analytica turns up again. And I'll bet you on that same episode, not even tied to Cambridge Analytica necessarily, we'll be talking about Facebook too. I mean, it feels like every time we do one of these mix and match shows, we should just automatically leave a space for Facebook. Because if there hasn't been a privacy concern or scandal around the social network lately, wait 5 minutes. So what is it this time?
Yeah, we can't even go a month without some new Facebook scandal making headlines. And the latest one seems really familiar. It involves Facebook, a personality app, user data being shared with third parties, but it isn't the one you're thinking of. While this is a separate scandal from the Cambridge Analytica fiasco, it does have a striking number of similarities. Back on April 7th, Facebook suspended the My Personality app from its platform, stating that the app may have violated data sharing policies. Before the app was suspended, more than 6 million people completed a series of questionnaires presented by the app, with 3 million of those users agreeing to share their data. Up until 2014, one of the collaborators on the My Personality project was Alexander Kogan, who went on to create the This Is Your Digital Life app, which provided user data to Cambridge Analytica and is at the center of that particular scandal. So where's the scandal in this case? Well, the data was supposed to be completely anonymous. It turned out it was barely anonymous at all. Each participant was given a unique user ID, which was based off of data such as their age, gender, location, status updates, and the results of their personality quiz. And since so much information was tied together into a single user ID, it would have been a relatively simple task to tie an individual person to a specific user ID. And as if that wasn't bad enough, pretty much anybody who wanted to could have had access to this data set, which included highly personal answers to the questions posed in the personality test. Access to the dataset was password protected, but for the past 4 years, a working username and password combination has been available for anybody who cared to do a quick Google search.
There are two things that leap to mind. First of all, I saw somebody complain recently that while Facebook says we're going to try to be better, we're going to try to not, we're going to try to be better about your data. At F8, they announced that they're going to start a dating site or a dating service in Facebook. Can you think of anything more intimate?
Wow.
I mean, where more information is going to be shared. I mean, it's kind of amazing. And yet, I mean, we were talking earlier about, well, yeah, we can leave that for another time. Facebook, I mean, as far as financially, Facebook is back to pre-scandal levels. Like it lost billions and billions of dollars in worth. And now it's right back to where it was. And it hasn't even been 3 months, has it? Since the Cambridge Analytica story broke? Maybe 4. I mean, we have, I think we as people sort of, it's easy for us to forget or we have fear of missing out. And so we don't leave Facebook.
Yeah, you still haven't deleted your Facebook app, your Facebook profile, your everything.
You don't know. Except, of course, you do know because right, we're friends on Facebook. So, of course, you know. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing to me. I want to ask about this one specifically, though. I mean, I don't feel like we've actually heard a lot about this one. And I guess what I'm wondering is, do you think that has to do with the similarity to the Cambridge Analytica story? Like, we all thought we'd heard it already? Or are such stories now so common that we've stopped paying attention, or that news organizations have stopped paying attention? Or does it have to be bigger than Cambridge Analytica for it to make headlines again?
This one was pretty recent. Although they blocked the app back in April, this didn't really start making news till a few days before we started recording this episode. But also the scale. I mean, we're talking 3 million users, and the data wasn't necessarily used to show political ads. I guess from what I read on this, Cambridge Analytica actually approached these people behind the My Personality project and said, "Hey, we want to use your data," and they were rebuffed. And the My Personality folks said, "No, you're too political." Subsequently, one of the guys tied to that went on and shared data from a different app with Cambridge Analytica. So maybe there's some tie in there, but it is probably because this is just a loss of really personal answers to some questions, just that, and not something like influencing an election or attempting to. That might be why it's not getting as much press, and also the fact that it's more than 80 million users less who were impacted.
Now, after all this, have you stopped doing those quizzes? Have you learned a thing or two from our shows and some of these examples?
I'll tell you what's annoying, honestly. I didn't often do those quizzes, and I never posted the results. But then, of course, we talked about the fact that, half the time, even if you don't click submit, the information's been collected anyway. At the very least, what I did was, I don't think I've ever clicked, yes, share my friend's information, or share information about my contacts, because I don't feel like that's my decision to make. But, there are plenty of other things I'm sure that I've done that, very stupidly got me targeted by something.
I still don't understand why that was ever an option in the first place. Like, it just seems so, I don't know. Not that Facebook really cared about privacy, but it seemed really strange that they were like, oh yeah, you can just share your friends' data and they don't get any say in this.
Well, I think the idea part of it was about the social marketing aspect of it, getting your friends to spend more time on it, get involved with it. Things like...
But the fact that you could share your friend's data, essentially, with a third party and your friend wouldn't even be alerted to it, that's just messed up.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. At the same time, though, to somebody who's not terribly concerned about privacy, you might think, do I want to share my friend's data? Well, my friend is on Facebook posting this stuff anyway, so why not? They may not be as hip to the kind of privacy protections that Facebook actually does have built in, because it's not like Facebook is front and center with those. Like, here's how not to share your data. That's not the top thing, or at least it wasn't before the whole Cambridge Analytica thing. But people might think, well, they're posting this stuff online anyway, so yeah, it's fine. Go ahead and look at it because it's already there for you to see. And not that that's correct, but I mean, that may be, the thinking that people have when they go ahead and click yes. Yeah, take a look at my friends.
Wait, I have a suggestion for Facebook. So when you start, because they're listening to the show right now.
I was going to say, I love your optimism that they're actually going, he's got, hang on. Okay, yeah, let me note this.
So when somebody actually does share your information, then that user should be notified that your information was shared by this person, and you could decide whether or not you actually want that person to be your friend.
Well, I mean, what would be better is, that person says that they want to share your information and you have the option of not sharing the information. Because, I mean, all Facebook is doing at that point is setting up a bit of acrimony, right? Nicholas Robbins said he would share my information. That jerk. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. The other button has to be, and by the way, is that cool with you? Because at that point, you actually are informed about, not only is your data going someplace, but you have the power to stop it, which sounds very GDPR of the whole thing.
I know. The board of GDPR, you could put this in version 2.0 if you'd like.
So moving on to another story. I mean, this is one that we can't forget, except I'll bet a lot of us have already. Let's do a brief update on the Equifax breach.
Well, remember back in episode 54 when we talked about the Equifax breach and how we weren't sure exactly what information the bad guys made off with? Well, now we have a better idea on what exactly was stolen. There are multiple congressional committees currently investigating the Equifax breach, and Equifax recently released a statement to the SEC in response to those inquiries. This statement broke down the specifics on how much data was compromised in the breach and in what categories. So, without further ado, here's the breakdown. Names for 146.6 million people, and date of birth info for 146.6 million people, social security numbers for 145.5 million people, address information for 99 million people, gender info for 27.3 million, phone numbers for 20.3 million, driver's license numbers for 17.6 million people, email addresses for 1.8 million people, credit card numbers and expiration dates for 209,000 people, tax IDs for 97,500 people, and driver's license states for 27,000 people. While this doesn't make up for the massive failure on Equifax's part to secure such sensitive data, at least we have a better idea of what the bad guys made off with.
I'm still not sure that we know what to actually do about that. I know you're supposed to keep an eye on your credit report and all that stuff, but as we talked about on some past episode, I mean, they may not even be selling this information yet. This information may be in, like a digital vault. And then after all of the free credit reports and all that stuff, after all the free credit monitoring is over, I mean, that's just when this information comes back out, right?
And when I think we talked about this when we first covered the Equifax breach, but those numbers, like 146.6 million people, somewhere in there, that's pretty close to the number of adult credit holders in the United States, which pretty much means that if you're an adult and you have a credit card, most likely some random bad guy has your name, date of birth, social security number, and possibly more information. I mean, it's the scope of that. You go, well, what are we supposed to do? Because yes, you can monitor your credit, you can put a freeze on your credit, you can do all these things, but the fact of the matter remains that most likely every single American adult has had their social security number stolen. And we haven't had any real guidance on what we're supposed to do about that fact.
Just look away. Look away. Maybe everybody will forget about this.
I was going to say, it's time for a nap. I think what we're supposed to do about that is time for a nap. We do have one more story that we want to hit, and this is another news story. This is not an update. This is brand new. Signal and the case of the reappearing, disappearing messages. Oh, such exciting times.
You may have heard about the secure messaging app Signal, which we previously discussed in episode 29. That was the episode we did covering encrypted chat apps. You may also be familiar with the Notification Center feature that's built into macOS. It's really helpful when it comes to quickly checking your upcoming appointments, recent email that's arrived, or to catch up on notifications from apps that you might have missed. And it's that specific feature of macOS that inadvertently caused disappearing messages from Signal to magically reappear. In early May, security researcher Alec Muffet posted a tweet to let people know that Signal's disappearing messages were anything but that on macOS. Security researcher Patrick Wardle took note and decided to dive deeper to see if he could determine the reason behind the app's misbehavior. And it turns out that the reason Signal's messages don't really disappear had to do with the way Notification Center works. When an app calls the code to display a message in Notification Center, that message will remain in Notification Center unless it's an alert notification and the user clicks the close button on that alert, unless the user opens Notification Center and clicks the X button to remove the notification directly from there, or if the app explicitly dismisses the notification. Unless one of those things occurs, the notification will remain in Notification Center, and for an app like Signal, that means Notification Center could be showing some information that was best left private. Notification Center only holds the most recent notifications, but Patrick decided to see if older messages were being stored somewhere on disk, and of course, it turns out that they were. By locating a specific database file deep in macOS, Patrick was able to recover messages he had previously received with Signal, including ones that were set to disappear. So in this case, it turned out to be a combination of the way Notification Center works in macOS, along with the way Signal's developers interact with Notification Center, that caused this particular bug to appear. Now, for once, there's a happy ending to one of the stories we're presenting. Signal quickly released an update that squashed this particular bug, and notifications are now removed on remote read, on focus, and on exit. Yay for squashed bugs.
I gotta say, I'm surprised this is something that Signal could fix. I kind of thought that Notification Center was working like... I was sort of picturing Notification Center like a chalkboard, right? And if you write something on the chalkboard and then you erase it, if you don't erase it well, it's still there. I thought this was going to end up being something strictly on Apple's side. It's interesting that it was something that Signal was actually able to take care of.
Well, the one thing to note is that Notification Center is opt-in. You, as a developer, have to add the code that interacts with it. So even if they hadn't been able to fix it, they could have just taken out that feature completely, and that would have technically solved the problem. But it looks like they were able to figure it out in a different way as well.
Now, does that actually kill the buried database that Patrick found?
That's up for debate. I haven't tested it myself, but I know that one of Patrick's suggestions was just in case you might want to delete this entire database.
Gotcha.
So from the brief amount I read on that bug fix was that they are now successfully taking care of the database entries themselves. But as far as previous entries, I'm not certain if that's a retroactive fix or not.
So you said though that, well, if people want more information on this, I'm assuming that they could actually go to Patrick's website. Do you know what that is off the top of your head?
Yes, it's objective-c.com, and it's spelled objective-see.com. And he has a bunch of different stuff on his website, security tools, blog posts, including the one that we were discussing here in this episode.
So if you did not get a chance to write that down as we were saying it, I'm going to encourage you to not worry, because we have a website where you can find that. In fact, we've got information on all the stories. I said earlier that none of these topics were big enough for a show of their own, but they're all big, and there is a lot more information around every one of these sort of mini stories that we did today. So if you'd like to dig deeper on any or all of them, or if you just want to, go back there and find Patrick Wardle's website again, the place to go is securemac.com/checklist. You'll find notes for today's show. You'll find notes for all the other shows we've ever done before. You'll find notes for the shows that we mentioned earlier in this episode. securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, we do have an email address for you to check out, or for you to use, actually. It is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.